It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Boy, I got to tell you, I thought all of the crazy right-wing lunatics, all of the anti-Bud Lights, all of the anti-Colin Kaepernick, I thought they had all left watching NFL games, but this Taylor Swift thing, wow, the anger, the vitriol, the oh, the panties all up in a bunch. And why? Because a woman's watching football and rooting for her potential future husband. This person has some clout. People follow her. People go to her concerts. People like her music. I've been to a Taylor Swift concert. It's an experience. But look, I've been to a lot of concerts. It's remarkable watching all of the right-wing echo chamber collectively lose its mind. And you know, all of them, you know, from the far extreme ones to the F channel, you know, out there blathering on about this woman. And I was looking at some of the tweets where, I don't want my daughters to be like Taylor Swift. I want them to be like Lauren Boebert. I think that was my favorite. I'm going, really? You want them to be like Lauren Boebert, a high school dropout? All of the insanity that circles her down the drain. That's the ideal of a conservative woman. And I go back to, I thought they left. I thought the whole kneeling thing was a bridge too far. I thought the whole Black national anthem was too far. I thought they were done. I thought they had given up. So I don't know why they're still watching. This is the part that gets me. Do they watch just because they want to get outraged? Do they watch just because they need something to fuel their inner fire? I don't know. But it's amazing, considering the fact that we've got real problems in this country. That isn't one of them. I don't like the Kansas City Chiefs, but now I'm in this position where, to be honest, I don't really care for either team that's playing in the Super Bowl, the 49ers or the Chiefs. Personally, I wanted the Lions to win. I was rooting for the underdog because that's who I am. I root for the underdog. I certainly didn't want the Ravens growing up in Cleveland. Sorry, Baltimore. Never going to be a Ravens fan. But here's the thing. I now kind of want the Chiefs to win. So maybe their heads will literally explode and we can be done with this insanity at some point, because this is craziness. And understand, this is about keeping a certain segment of the population all bunched up, all angry, all lathered up, one more thing to be pitting us and dividing us over. And so we don't solve real problems, because understand, we've got problems. We've got an infrastructure that is being built, but not, I would argue we need more. We've got manufacturing to reshore. I think Biden's doing a great job doing that. I'd like to see more. We've got an education system that could use some help. We could most certainly undo some of the horrible damage that's been done over the last several years. In the way of vouchers and all the silver bullet schemes that they come up with and try mostly on poor kids. Isn't it amazing how all of these education schemes, these silver bullet plans, they work out and they try on poor kids? You don't see this in the good zip codes. Hey, let's see how we can defund your education system and try this newfangled thing. You never see that, do you? No, when something's wrong in a very wealthier neighborhood, where they go, maybe we need to pay teachers more. Maybe we need better materials. Maybe we need better infrastructure. Maybe we can invest more, not destroy more. And this is where my mind keeps coming back to. These things are planned. I happened to watch a weird woman just blathering on the the OAN channel, and she was just, the NFL is indoctrination, and they take children and they play them in these sports and they indoctrinate them in their schools, and so that when their dreams are broken, then they follow these adult athletes. And I'm going, yeah, all of us played sports as kids. I'm a big supporter of sports as children. Big supporter of learning teamwork. I'm a big supporter of learning to be a good sport, of going out and doing your best, and sometimes it not being enough, so that you go back and you work harder. There's a lot of good lessons to be learned from sport, when done without craziness at the top. Now, I've had some coaches, the kind who, they want you sliding into second base with your foot up, so you hit somebody in the where. That's not sportsmanship. Oddly enough, he voted for Republicans. And you find that people who see the value in things like sports see that there are positives that come out of it. The idea of teamwork, the idea of sportsmanship, the idea of doing your best and giving your all, and sometimes it not always being enough, and the idea that you got to work harder sometimes. Oddly enough, what conservatives say they understand and believe, but not their actions. Now, what's weird is this OAN woman said, if they had this kind of fervor for Jesus, this would be a different country. And I go, yeah, we would look like a lot of Middle Eastern countries. We would have, again, what I've been saying for a while is coming, the idea of Christian Sharia law right around the corner. So if we had religious zealots more in control, can you imagine what an NFL game would look like? Instead of, images of Taylor Swift, applauding and cheering on her man, maybe halftime beheadings. And is that the nation we want? Some, and I got to wonder if this commentator, some I think do. So for me, I'll be watching the game. I always do. And I guess now I have to root for the Chiefs, even though Broncos fan from the time I was a little kid. They're in the same division and beat up the Broncos pretty good this year once. I now have to decide, do I go with the Chiefs, who I don't like, simply because of this? See what craziness is done to us in this country? Personally, it will be about the party we're going to have around the Super Bowl, the friends and the family who will come and watch the game. My wife will comment on every commercial, and the food that will come in, and the camaraderie of the day, the community that comes out of it, at least for me, because that's the right message here. Not the one that says, well, it's a psyop. It's a conspiracy. That's crazy. I want to hear your thoughts. Who will you be rooting for? And are you paying attention to this whole irrational outburst? I know they need something to be angry about. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday on the program, we talked a little bit about this Washington Post story that got a lot of interestingly enough, this got a lot of email traffic. People going, this is what our media does. It's all about the horse race. It's not about the issue. It's about creating more of that division, depending on which hat you're wearing in this race. And, look, $150 million sounds like a lot of money, but going to 18 states, you start doing the math, you start dividing that up, it's not an awful lot. And I seriously doubt, as I said yesterday on the program, that this small amount of grant money, this small amount of research dollars going into places like Florida or Utah or Wyoming are going to change any voters. But what it's going to do is it's going to help us reshore manufacturing and compete with China. And nobody's talking about that. Which is why, well, we are. That's why I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come back and share some thoughts. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, great to be with you.
So did you see this article that I'm talking about by Eva Dowd? That really, it's, I know it's election year. I know it's campaign season. I know we need to, gin up some kind of, tug and push and pull and some kind of horse race. But this was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I would, I'm someone who supports a lot of manufacturing jobs, but it's hard for me to claim that, $150 million spread out to a bunch of states, some of them are red states, is going to somehow sway voters one way or another. It's like, most people will have forgotten about this if they ever heard of it within the next 48 hours.
If they ever heard of it. And that's the problem. If they ever heard of it. And for me, how this story should have been written is you've got the Biden administration setting up these research programs through the National Science Foundation to set up these innovation engines all across the country. Politics, red hat, red, blue, right, left, not mattering, but bringing manufacturing back, investing in this country, that should have been the story.
Yeah, the substance of this is quite important, for our future. I'm not going to pretend like it's a kitchen table issue that people are going to talk about, when they're thinking about presidential politics. But it is, because we've been playing catch up. We fell behind on research and development and manufacturing for a variety of reasons. There was offshoring when companies became more shareholder focused. They invested less in research and development because that was less money that could be paid out to the shareholders, and all of that became like a vicious cycle, and we fell behind in some types of manufacturing because of it. And so we're playing catch up now, and I think that's the good news, is that the takeaway from this is that we haven't conceded this, that we're getting back in the game, that we're going to be investing some in some strategic industries to help jumpstart new processes and more productivity and what have you, and that the industries that have been cited are important from a national security and economic security perspective. And the hope is that in some way this will in the future help to create an ecosystem where we're creating more factories here that are making the types of innovations that will come out of this research. And so it's a long play, if you're making that play, but it is an essential part of it. And one that I would just say that we have done a terrible job of keeping up with the last, actually 4 or 5 decades. And one that only Joe Biden has been willing to invest a lot of public resources in helping to turbocharge this kind of innovation, which is going to help us all down the road.
Now, you say this isn't a kitchen table issue, but shouldn't it be? I mean, the idea of, look, I've been through, and you have too, a lot of communities across this country that lost their manufacturing base, that lost their community identity. This is a way to say, hey, look, we want that back. Shouldn't this be part of that conversation, especially when you start looking at all of the money and resources that we're putting into rebuilding infrastructure and reshoring some manufacturing? Shouldn't this be it's just a blip on the kitchen table conversation? Because this is an economic thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right about this. And I think part of the challenge here is that there, certainly the Biden administration could do a better job connecting this to things that people are talking about, which is like opportunity. And when you are having those conversations at home, it's like, and if you're in a small town or a mid-sized town that used to have a manufacturing facility, and you're like, wow, I could go work at the dollar store for minimum wage, or I could get a job in retail, could work at a warehouse, or I could drive 50 miles to get to the nearest opportunity. But having the possibility that a factory is going to relaunch in a community would be a very big deal, Rick. And, that's something that we're seeing. And this is all part of that mosaic, right? You got to have the innovation. You have to have cutting edge technology to be competitive in this global marketplace. And so policies like this are very important, but accounting like this much is going to red states, this much is going to blue states, whose palms are you trying to graze? I mean, that's not the right angle.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's not that much money. I mean, to be honest, it's not enough, especially when you're talking about the a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. You're going, Joe Biden went to Wisconsin and talked about $1 billion investment in that state, but the couple of dollars in this research grant, that's really going to move the needle. It seems kind of ludicrous. It just does. But here's the thing. The reality is we've got to get, as you put it, get back in the game. And as we talked about yesterday on the show, the reality is China's making stuff, and they have become the producer of the world. And we talked a little bit yesterday about the top U.S. companies versus the top Chinese state-owned industries. They're the manufacturing stuff. They're the construction industry. They're the oil and gas. And ours are mostly retail and services. So that Reagan dream of turning the U.S. into a service-based economy, we're living that dream, and it's kind of a nightmare for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, if you're someone who works for a big financial institution on Wall Street, the past couple of decades, with a few exceptions, have generally been really good for you, right? Or if you're a shareholder in a big retail company that has sources globally and sells in the American market, which is the richest in the world, it's been pretty good for you. If you're a worker who's subject to global competition, it's been a rough go over the last couple of decades, and you've had downward pressure on your wages for almost all of that time. You've seen jobs get shipped overseas, and you've seen people saying that stuff's never going to come back. And so, and then you have people take it for granted until they can't get stuff, right? And so this is kind of what precipitated, I think, this newfound interest in trying to make things again and reversing part of that story. But, and you're right about this, it is going to take more than $150 million in manufacturing innovation grants. It will take this sustained long-term commitment to, improving our infrastructure, making sure that we have good community college programs for kids who want to get into the skilled trades in manufacturing, or adults who want to shift careers too, I should add. And that we're also investing in those industries that are going to be growing in the future, like EV and clean energy. And even with all the investments that we are making, we're still nowhere approaching what the rest of the world has done on this, and in particular China, or even the EU, who I know likes to bellyache about the stuff that we're doing. But we're playing catch up, and it's important that we play catch up so that those kitchen table conversations are converted from, I have so much debt, I can only get a job at the dollar store, I can't move out of the house, to I'm making something great here, I'm going to buy a home, and I'm going to live the American dream. We need more of those success stories.
No, I'm right there with you. Now, obviously trade policy is something that's going to be big this election cycle. You've got Donald Trump who put tariffs on China. Joe Biden, to his credit, has maintained those and actually coming out with a policy to add to that to help us reshore manufacturing. But I'm watching all of these attacks on the U.S. Trade Representative, Catherine Tai. I'm watching all of the attacks, coming out on tariffs in general. Still, there's that vein of economists and corporatists who are, no, it's going to be bad. And even Donald Trump has come out and said if he's reelected, a 60% tariff potentially. Thoughts on where we are with all of this?
Yeah, well, first of all, just going to the Trump proposal that was reported in the Washington Post, that apparently privately they've discussed having a 60% tariff on all Chinese products. There's a 25% tariff on probably about I want to say about a third of Chinese products right now that was put into place that Biden has kept, by the way. So just points out that Trump has to try to up the game to keep up where Biden is on some of this stuff. And on the other side, you have people who are trashing the Biden trade policy, saying that and its leaders saying that, you know, we're not doing enough free trade agreements and there's not enough focus on that, like they're like they want to relive the 90s, again, or the 2000s, which were not good for working people in this country. And so I do see that as being an ongoing thread in this election, is that the elites are still clinging to with what I would call, Rick, a religious fervor.
Yes.
Right? A religious fervor, this idea that free trade is sacrosanct and you cannot deviate from that. Otherwise, really bad things are going to happen. And the reality is, Trump did a lot of crazy things. Let's be very clear about that. The tariff policy that Bob Lighthizer, who I think, along with Catherine Tai, have been the two best trade ambassadors we've ever had in the history of the United States, it did make a difference in level setting with China. And, as bad as a lot of stuff was, there's really, and if you talk to people, did you notice the tariffs? No one noticed these tariffs that were going to affect. I mean, there was inflation that happened after COVID, but if for all the bad stuff that happened during the Trump years, you can't say that skyrocketing prices because of tariffs on Chinese products was one of them. It just didn't happen. That's trying to rewrite history. And so whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anybody else who's saying we ought to use tariffs as an instrument of United States trade policy, that is a legitimate policy proposal. Yet you still have these stories popping up about how the sky is going to fall if we do all of this.
Yeah. No, and look, it's like any of the zealot class. It's the tax cut zealots or the free trade zealots. The reason it hasn't worked, Scott, is we just didn't do it enough. We need to do more. We need to. It's amazing to me. You point out the failure after failure after failure and how it's harming people, and you go, no, we just haven't done it enough.
Yeah. Rick, I'm going to go off here now because what you said is exactly true. And even though we have stock markets at record levels, wages are up, inflation is down, unemployment is down among a lot of different demographics. Things are actually pretty good, right? Yet you have, global business lobbies saying regulation and taxes are out of control. Unless we cut corporate taxes and stifle regulations, we're going to be going out of business. They're making record money right now. And that's the thing that gets me, is that somehow they're trying to create this problem that doesn't exist. I mean, things are pretty good for them when you look at the bottom line right now, but they want the freedom to outsource jobs. They want the freedom to pay workers as little as possible. And they don't want any sort of regulatory responsibility. They want to go all in for shareholders. And look, shareholders seem to be doing just fine right now. S&P 500, like, I think, is at a record level or whatever. So it's not like there's a disconnect from the real economy and Wall Street. There seems to be actually good synchronization right now because there's been some attention paid to the needs of working people in this country through trade policy and through more rights for workers and through these investments that are going to have real returns for workers who don't have a four-year college degree, people who build things and people who make things, Rick.
No, we most certainly need stronger labor protections. There's a lot more that needs to be done to swing this pendulum back because, as you pointed out, for 40 plus years, we've been going down this path that has enriched the very wealthy. Look, I say free trade and the tax cut zealotry, that stuff has worked exactly as it was supposed to. It's made the wealthier wealthy, and the wealthy wealthier, and the working poor and the working class a lot poorer. It's time for that pendulum to swing somewhere back to the middle. Look, I don't want it to swing all the way back to the other side, but as you've said, you've got to have some synchronization where everyone does better. What was that little quote? Everyone does better when everyone does better. That kind of thing.
Yeah, you're spot on. And trade policy is an element of that. And so I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about the backlash to things that Joe Biden is doing or things that Donald Trump is saying. And the problem, again, for Trump is going to be that Biden's been pretty good on worker-centered trade policy. And so Trump's going to have to try to leap over that fence. And there's not necessarily a need to. I mean, it's trade policy has been revolutionized. You can't pretend like it hasn't been.
No, Biden.
That's what. Yeah.
This administration it's been a sea change. But I real quick, before I let you go, the 60% trade tariff. That sounds like a lot. Would that be a number that you would be okay with? Would that trigger a trade war? What do you think that? Because it seems like something that the right would lose their mind over, but it's something that Trump is privately thrown out there. What do you think that would bring?
Yeah, I'd call that a bargaining position, right? Because he's trying to stake a claim out there. But the reality is, and we saw this even with the 25% tariff, but it didn't even happen in full until the COVID crisis and all the supply chain stuff happened. And you saw firms adjust. And what they did is they negotiated better terms with their suppliers in China, or they moved their production either to the United States or to Mexico or to some other Asian country. They absorbed some of the costs themselves, but you saw them make do. And so the idea, I think that you'd just see more of this, more of the trade deficit coming out of China, probably going to some other countries. We'd get a little bit of that. I think from a consumer effect perspective, you'd see very little of that. You might see some of these shopping apps that are based in China go out of business, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
That is not a bad thing. I'm hoping that happens at some point very soon. But Scott, as always, I appreciate the time. Good stuff.
You bet, Rick. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. You certainly want to check that out for our Free Speech TV audience. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time for our radio folks. Quick break. Right back.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I came across an article the other day over at the Washington Post that grabbed my attention. It was talking about the death of Leroy Moton. And, it got me thinking about back in 2015, we had done a civil rights tour as part of the program that took us all across the South. And basically looking for, all of those places where black people were treated poorly, that we now have tourism. And one of the places that we ended up with was in Alabama at the gravesite of Viola Liuzzo. Viola was a 39-year-old nursing student, wife of a mother of five, wife of a Teamster executive, from Detroit down in Alabama. Well, actually went to Selma and was making the run back and forth from Montgomery to Selma, shuttling people back and forth to the airport for the march after Sunday Bloody Sunday. This is 1965. They're fighting for the Voting Rights Act. There's all this stuff. And, I see this story of Leroy Moton, who back in 2015, we tried to hunt down to interview because we were going to be going through, and we did go through the area where this murder took place. of Viola Liosa, which is, in Loudonsboro, Alabama. And for those who don't know, again, this woman, the only white woman to lose her life during the civil rights era, murdered by a Klansman, one of them an FBI agent, or not an FBI agent, an FBI informant, working for the FBI. And this story just, at the time that I was going through and we were doing all of this research and stuff, this is one of those stories that just grabbed my attention in that, here was just, an average, housewife, just a student, someone who had gotten active on a college campus, said, hey, I want to change the world. And went from Detroit down to Selma to participate in the Selma, the Montgomery marches, shuttled people back and forth to the airport, was there to try and affect change. And for her trouble, she was murdered. And, we drove that U.S. Route 80 there in Alabama and went to her gravesite. And it's easy to miss. And we did it right there at mile marker 111. And I still remember that, just where that was. And I remember, standing on that space, just looking around. And even to this day, all these years later. Now, remember, this is March 25th, 1965. This woman is murdered by these Klansmen. And for the sin of driving a black male around. For the sin of being in the same car. And I remember standing on this ground going, there's no help here for anyone. Even to this day. There was really nothing on that stretch of road. This was an ambush. And look, they stopped for gas. These Klansmen, they saw this. They started harassing them. She tried to outrun them, couldn't, and they shot her twice and killed her. But Leroy Moton was able to get away. After the car crashed, he came to, he ran, and he was able to then, get away and lead a life. He passed, back last September at the age of 78. Was a foreman at a manufacturing facility, as I understand it, and basically died in obscurity. Where the way the story goes and the way that they tell this story, a handful of people showed up to his funeral. There was no this guy's civil rights notable, none of that. And as the person in the article, kind of lays out, he goes, that's I guess the beauty of the movement is that it was a lot of everyday people. And this is what Dr. King was talking about. People from every walk of life coming and participating and trying to make things better, trying to make change where you can. But I'm as I'm reading through this, it's one of those things that if not for the Teamsters Union, if not for some folks, her story lost in history. Because the Teamsters, as a Teamster, it's one of those things that I've heard about for years. Every March, there's a story about her. So they keep her alive in those memories and in those stories. And it makes you think, how many other people has history forgotten? And this is where I go back to education of these moments. For me, when we did our civil rights tour back in 2015, it all sprang about because my oldest daughter was, in grade school and learning about, Rosa Parks. And, we had that conversation like parents and kids have, what'd you learn in school today? How was your day? And she said, we learned about Rosa Parks. I'm like, okay, what'd you learn? Well, she was tired. And it ended there. Now, that could just be the brevity of a child, taking in information and then filtering back out the most simplistic frame possible. There is that. Or it could be that's just the way it was framed. Look, she didn't want to give up her seat. She was tired. And then the rest is history. So we decided that, as part of the program, we wanted to go and experience history. We wanted to seek this stuff out, as we had done 2 years earlier with our labor history tour that took us across the country. And it was a couple of things. One, want to educate the kids so that they have me as an experiential learner. I need to see and feel and touch things. So this was an opportunity to get out on the road and do some of that. And, the story of Viola Liuzzo was one of those that as a Teamster member for, over 35 years, this is one that was kind of special in that this was a woman who, 5 kids, mother, student, lost her life standing up for somebody else. And, the sad reality out of this is, none of them were convicted of any state crimes. There were some federal crimes. I think a couple of them I think 3 of them got convicted on, but they only spent, I think, 10 years in jail. And it was groundbreaking. It was historic. And again, my mind keeps going back to the stories that came out of it, that, the fact that there was an FBI informant in the car, the FBI, went on this disinformation campaign, just so that the politicians and the press would have some cover. She was, having a sexual relationship with all these black men, which, was trying to, and even if she was, who cares? But she was a heroin addict. She was all this stuff. She was a communist. She abandoned her children. And the reality is no, this was a woman who heeded the call of Dr. King and went to the march in Selma to Montgomery. And for that, she was executed. She was murdered. Now, I go through and I think about this, of where we are as a country and how this story and that tour really, affected me. Because, my experience with Black history was a lot of, Dr. King, Malcolm X, that stuff. Not the horrific treatment of people throughout history that we found. There were a couple of places that we went, a couple of institutes and a couple of museum type places that we went to, where the curators, who were nice enough to give us tours and sit down with us and talk to us and all of that, said to us, hey, there's some pretty bad stuff here. You may want to have one of our assistants take the kids around. And when they said that, I always heeded their warnings, because I'm a little more, they should see things. But when the person who's running the place says, this is too far, I followed their lead, and I'm glad they did, because, they were just children at the time. My oldest daughter at the time was 13. My son was probably, 9. My youngest daughter was 7. They didn't need to see burning bodies and lynched bodies hanging from trees. And there were numerous pictures of that. And that's our history. And for me, at the time, I was saying, look, it's important to see this, to understand that this is what happened. And, as a country, take responsibility for it. And then say it's not going to happen again. And I know people say, well, they're making us feel bad for it. I didn't do it. Wasn't me. But as a country, we've got some atoning to do. So the bad stuff should stop happening. And part of this is, that people shouldn't be murdered for giving people a ride. So as I was thinking about this story today, I came across an AP story. And that AP story, again, just makes you go, at what point do we, as a country, say, enough is enough? But the AP story about prison labor and how we are abusing prison labor like nobody else. And in fact, countries that we're exporting stuff to countries that we say they can't use prison labor, so we've blocked their imports into our country, but we're exporting to those countries because we're so much better. And this AP story goes really into depth about just how deeply tied our entire economy is to current slave labor conditions. They start off with one of the biggest cattle producers in the country is in Louisiana at one of the big prisons down there, at the Angola prison, and how if you don't work in they're raising the cattle, they send in the people to beat you. It's terrible. And they go through and talk about the fact that agriculture is a big part of what they get to sell. And you're talking hundreds of billions of dollars worth of products. And how all of this started basically right after the Civil War, and was enshrined in the Constitution by the 13th Amendment, that said slavery and involuntary servitude are banned except as punishment for a crime. So if you're in prison, we can put you to work. The lease convict programs that we saw in places like Tennessee, where we're going to use those people, those slaves that we picked up for minor crimes. We're going to send them into the white mines where those miners are on strike, so that we can, one, continue the white-black divide, but two, crush the strike of those white miners to ensure that they don't make better wages, hours, conditions, so that the bosses, the owners, can put more money in their pockets. Are we surprised that all these years later, still going on, just differently named? And here we are, and they go through, the story of, people working on plantations and farms and all of this stuff, doing the same job that slaves did 150 years ago. Only the difference is yeah, good luck. Explain it to me, because I can't. And how prison labor, there are no federal protections. There's no workers' comp. There's no unemployment. There's no safety regulations. There's none of that stuff. And if someone dies on the job, well, you're incarcerated. You're not even really a person. And, this again is one of those things where we've known this for years. This is not new. But to see another story coming out about, we've got all of this prison labor that's going on. We've got all of these people who are being used and abused, for our cheap labor fixed, so that the corporate the corporate bottom line can look fatter and happier. But we're just saying, well, they're just prisoners. They get. We're able to justify it by saying, well, they did something wrong. And where my mind goes in this is, if you allow these prisoners to be exploited the way they are, if you allow them to be, put into conditions that, truthfully, you would never consider working in, but justifying by saying, they're just, they're less than human, they're less than us, then eventually those conditions trickle down to you. Eventually, we all suffer this, because these are, as they point out in this article, these are some of the biggest corporations in this country who are benefiting from it. McDonald's and Burger King, and go down the list of these giant conglomerates who are, Coca-Cola, Walmart, all using this prison labor, but and violating their own policies while doing it. But it's perfectly okay because the government says it's okay. And you go, the reality is, sadly, that the argument is, well, we're helping to rehabilitate them. They're learning a skill. Nonsense. They're being exploited. And look, I'm not against people learning a skill. I'm not against people, working, as long as they're compensated right, as long as they're treated fairly, as long as it's voluntary. And they go into the article. Explain to me why it is that you have a system that's set up that says, sorry, we're going to cheat you out of your labor, And not just that, but we're going to put you in deplorable conditions. Now, some say, look, well, while they're incarcerated, they should pay for their own incarceration. And there's some argument to that. There's something to that. And I've always said that, part of the system should be about caring for themselves. I think the prison should be almost self-sufficient. You should have, textile areas where people are making the clothes that they wear. They should have farming areas where they produce the food that they consume. I was as I was reading this story, I was remembering a small county prison in my neck of the woods that years ago, it's got to be 25 years ago. They used to have a little farming patch. I can't imagine more than 4 or 5 acres. But you would see the prisoners out there, working with hand tools, cultivating the soil and growing stuff. And the food was for the prison, for prison use. And what they ended up doing is they ended up, paving it over. And then, because, hey, we got to make money off of prisons. And then, basically outsourcing that and bringing food in. Because it's about the money. Our prison system is about exploiting cheap labor and profitizing it, figuring out who wins. And when you look at the fact that we incarcerate more people than anyone in the world, both in sheer numbers and as a matter of population, are you surprised that there are always bad ideas on how to exploit it? And I guess I'm not. And this is where my mind goes to this place of, we think that we've moved so far ahead, that we've learned the lessons of the past and of history. But sadly, we're repeating many of the same things. And for me to forget the lives of someone like Leroy Moton and Viola Louisa is not just bad for history, it's bad for our future. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. Thanks for tuning in to The Rick Smith Show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @Rick Smith Show, like us on Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all that and much more at thericksmithshow.com. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day the United States Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, abolishing slavery. President Abraham Lincoln had already issued the Emancipation Proclamation, but there was worry that the proclamation, an emergency wartime measure, would not stand up in the courts after the war had ended. The introduction of the amendment first occurred in 1864 as the Civil War raged on. That meant that only Northern legislators were present to debate the issue. Despite this, the amendment failed to pass the House of Representatives. Determined to ensure its passage on the second try, President Lincoln made the amendment part of the National Republican platform for the presidential election. He lobbied heavily for the bill and was able to win enough support for its passage. The New York Times described the scene after the vote in the House of Representatives, writing, "No attempt was made to suppress the applause, which came from all sides, everyone feeling that the occasion justified the fullest expression of approbation and joy." The final amendment read, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place, subject to their jurisdiction." The amendment then had to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. The ratification marked a fundamental change in the labor system of the United States. No more would the nation be divided by free labor and slave labor laws. Kentucky did not officially ratify the 13th Amendment until 1976, and Mississippi did not follow until 1995. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So again, I come back to this because I think it's important. This division that has been just exploited for pretty much from the beginning of this country. We are easily in the working class divided on race, on gender, now on orientation, on nationality. You name it. There are dividing lines that corporate America, that the very wealthy have figured out how to exploit. And look, race being one of the big ones. And, I go back to and I think of the Jay Gould quote, or a quote that's attributed to railroad magnate Jay Gould back in the 1880s. I could pay half the working class to murder the other half. And even if he didn't say it, this is the playbook. And I look at what Trump is doing right now. Trump sees the economy doing well and somehow has got to take credit for it because it can't be Biden. Somehow Trump has got to say, it's all me. So he recently said, the stock market only makes rich people richer, which is true. I don't think he meant to say that out loud. But he truthed out just the other day, this is the Trump stock market because my polls against Biden are so good that investors are projecting that I will win and that will drive the market up. Everything else is terrible. Watch the Middle East, and record-setting inflation has already taken its toll. Make America great again. Yeah. This guy, you got to give him credit. It's always sunny in MAGA land. It's always he gets credit for it. Whether it's good, he gets credit for it. When it's bad, he blames somebody else. But he takes credit for all the good stuff. All the bad stuff, somebody else's fault. Never any consequences fall on Donald Trump. Also, right around the same time, he truthed out an attack on Sean Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers. He said Sean Fain is a weapon of mass destruction on auto workers in the automobile manufacturing industry in the United States. Is he under contract to China? Because they will be getting almost all of our car-making business within a very short period of time, which is weird because normally he uses all caps. This one, car is capitalized, business is capitalized. Yeah, I'm not sure what school he went to, but not what you expect. And then all, capital A, capital auto workers should, and then all caps, vote for Trump. Make America great again. Because you got redundancy, you got to keep that going. You got to keep that in mind. Because evidently he thinks he's the only guy who can make this country great. Now, what I find interesting is Trump is the guy who, he's the Herbert Hoover of our generation. He left office, the country was in chaos. The supply chains were broken. Unemployment was through the roof. We were in the throes of a major pandemic that he boogered up. There's all this stuff. And you just go, maybe we don't do that again. But Sean Fain did what he does best and fired back quite eloquently, talking about the records of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, saying, look, Joe Biden is a guy who walked on the picket line. This is a guy who showed up for working people. This is a guy who has put his money where his mouth is. He's not just talking the talk, he's literally walking the walk. Now, Donald Trump, on the other side, when he was trying to walk the walk, he did it at a non-union facility with no auto workers, and this whole show, this whole bread and circus event that they threw out. And he said, look, the reality is the records speak for themselves. Trump has never been somebody who has supported working people. What we're seeing, he said, is, Trump is doing the best. It's a rope-a-dope. He wants you to look over here while he's taking everything away. Fain said, it's divide and conquer tactic, and that's what worked for the billionaire class and corporate class forever. And, I got to tell you, this is what I've been saying for years now. Finally, someone of real power like Sean Fain is taking that message to the next step, and good on him. But I want to hear your thoughts. Are you okay with where we are? The economy doing well? And should Trump get credit for it? Is this Trump's stock market? Even though he's been out of office 3 years and all of the stuff that Biden's done, I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Starting on March 18th, we will be going for a full hour on Free Speech TV, so look for that. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.